morning on a Tuesday night for a change, and welcome to Beware of Spoilers. I am Adam. It's a Tuesday night because the movie in question for tonight, it didn't get a wide, let me rephrase it. It did get a wide release. It didn't get a long release. It got a short run through Fathom Events. We're talking about Clerks 3, as the title would suggest. I'm not going to spoil the end of this movie because the end of this movie is kind of something you can't. It works best if you don't know what it is going in, and then by the time you see it, you're going to realize that there really was no other way for this movie to end. And end in a way that is satisfying for the viewer. Considering this is meant to be the last one. It's in the beginning. I mean, if you see the Fathom event, I know today's Tuesday. I'm seeing it at 7, so I think it clocks in just over an hour and a half. So, I mean, that's, I think, the saving grace of most Kevin Smith movies is they're not particularly long. Which you got the hour and a half, right in that little sweet spot. Or hour 40, give or take, is, getting to my car and the little intro. I think that this is one of those movies, though, if it's not for the third act, I'm dancing around the subject here because I don't want to spoil what happens in the third act, because if you are going to see the movie, again, not knowing what's coming is probably the best way to see it, so go into it without seeing that, because because there was one thing that was spoiled for me, because it got spoiled on one of his podcasts recently, and then very early on they kind of addressed that in the movie, so it's not that big a deal, but by the time you get to the third act, something else major happens that is not really expected. I feel like I'm dancing around in a really weird way as to not spoil it, but I really don't want to give it away. I think that it is not knowing that that's coming and then seeing it happen and then having that realization as what's happening is happening, that it's happening, lets the emotional moment of the scene kind of land a little bit better. And I think that if it's not for that, and if it's not for the recreations of the scenes from Clerks with the original cast coming back and doing the same lines, framed the exact same way as it was, they're just now almost 30 years older. It doesn't quite, what's it called? I don't think it quite gets as well received as it is. A lot of the jokes are, especially, that's the thing is, it's like, I feel the same way I did about all three of the Marvel Spider-Man movies, where it's like, the first half of the movie is kind of forgettable and kind of not, perfect, and then you hit like a halfway point, and it really hits its stride, and when it hits its stride, it's kind of exactly what you need it to be. Because at that point, when it hits its stride, this movie is The Disaster Artist, but with a fictionalized recreation of Clerks. And, I mean, part of the problem with the first half of the movie is that a good 25 minutes of the movie is just a recreation of a dramatization of the story he told after he had the heart attack on basically every podcast he's ever been on. And I feel like that's a good way to... It's a good way to get through a good amount of time in the movie. But at the same time, the movie's being sold as Randall has a heart attack and survives the heart attack and then decides to make a movie. So we know that part of the story going in, and I think that when you have a Fathom event like this and you're getting a limited theatrical release and you're doing a road show to promote the movie, you have the built-in audience, and I understand wanting to tell that story, but what happens is, for me at least, knowing that story going in made it that way I'm I'm sitting there and I'm like, let's get through this part of the story. It's more like you're slogging through part of the plot rather than sitting down and understanding and enjoying part of the plot. I probably go to the other movie theater. I'm realizing now because of how close it is. So what ends up happening is you end up with this weird, like, not quite slog, but not quite, like, I don't want to call it a slog because that doesn't seem quite right, but it's like, if you know the story, you're going to be like, let's just move this along and get it, let's just get to the part that we want to see, which is it's kind of like the same thing in Disaster Artist, where it's like, we want to see the story of Tommy Wiseau make The Room. We want to. That's what we're here to see. We're here to see that part and to see all of the stories that we already know about the making of this movie dramatized. It's basically the exact same thing. That's what this movie feels like more than anything else. It's The Disaster Artist, but with Clerks instead of The Room, and like, it's not a debate. Clerks is a better movie. I feel like there's a lot of little, there's always going to be a lot of Easter eggs, especially, I would say, in a post-Tusk world. There's a lot of little Easter eggs for people who listen to his podcasts, as you'd expect. I saw a few reviews that, like, who is this for besides his fans? And I'm like, I think that, I think the movie works for more than just people who have seen other stuff. Because it is very much a midlife crisis movie. I mean, and unlike other midlife crisis movies that he has done, this one feels like it's actually attempting to grapple with that issue in a way that it works in a weird way. I feel like there's that moment, and I think my biggest complaint with the movie is and I said this with Thor: Love and Thunder too. There is tonal whiplash between comedic scenes, dramatic scene, comedic scene, dramatic scene. It transitions well again toward the end of the movie, but we've also seen that happen in two prior Clerks movies by the time we get to the third act. Because we've seen every Clerks movie so far, the two that have happened so far, and basically every movie, it's kind of an expectation at this point, is that movies will have a point where if you have two protagonist characters, they will get into a fight toward the end of the movie, and then they'll make up and resolve. And that is what we get to when we get to the third act of this movie, toward the beginning. And from then on, from the big fight on, it works very well. But before that point, there is this, there is a tonal whiplash. And again, there's another thing that I don't really want to spoil, so I'm not going to say what it is that happens that leads to said whiplash, but it does happen a few times where it's like there's this great comedic scene, and I think that part of it is because we get down from a comedic to the other one is it puts more attention, because the comedic scenes are all ensemble. The dramatic scenes, by and large, Brian O'Halloran has to carry. And as evidenced by the third act, he can do it. It's just the ones earlier, it's just a little bit kind of forced in a weird way where it doesn't feel quite right. The movie is great, though. I would say if you've liked Kevin Smith movies, I would say through, let's say through Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, you'll probably like this one too. You'll probably find something to enjoy in this, because his early movies were all telling stories about his life to an extent. They were all about, going like using his own experience and putting that on the screen and telling his story in that way. And where Reboot kind of put where Reboot kind of put the heart attack as as not in the movie in a weird way. It was just kind of like getting a chance to do this again. this one very much grapples with his mortality in a way that makes it kind of interesting. I don't know. I really like the movie. I did really like it. I would say this is probably more rewatchable than Jay and Silent Bob Reboot. And there's a section in the middle of the movie that's pretty funny with all the cameos when they're doing the auditions for the First Avenue Playhouse. That's pretty funny as well. Yeah, I mean, if you have not seen Clerks 3 yet, which is a distinct possibility you haven't, considering I saw it at 7 and it's doing the, what's it called? They're doing the roadshow kind of method of telling the story. Then I would recommend maybe you, maybe you go and see this movie. If you can see it at a Fathom event or if the roadshow is coming to wherever you are. But yeah, we'll wrap up there for today. Because I think that my not wanting to spoil what happens in the movie is, I don't want to say actively harming the ability for me to discuss it, but because the movie is very much Heart Attack making the movie third act in a very compartmentalized way, not being able to talk about the third act is definitely not helping as much as it could have. Had the third act been more, I don't want to say more forgettable, because I think had it been more forgettable, it would have ultimately harmed the movie, but whatever. So we'll wrap up there for today. I think we've covered enough ground on that. I think our next episode is going to be She-Hulk, the next episode. And until that episode, have a great rest of your week.